"My fire went out, may I stay tonight?" asked the Apache woman. "I have one bed," said Cowboy. The wind howled through the plains like a wild animal, and snow swirled in thick, blinding clouds. The world seemed almost empty, a quiet white desert stretching as far as the eye could see. In the middle of this frozen landscape stood a small, rough wooden cabin. Its walls were weathered from years of storms, and the roof sagged in places under the weight of snow. Inside, a fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting flickering shadows across the room. The smell of burning wood mixed with the faint scent of leather and smoke. The cabin belonged to a lone cowboy. He had been living in this remote part of the land for several months, carving out a life from the harsh wilderness. His days were long and lonely. He rode across the plains from sunrise to sunset, checking traps, hunting small game, and keeping an eye on the few cattle that had been entrusted to him by a nearby ranch. At night, he returned to his cabin, the only comfort being the warm fire he built for himself. This particular night was different. The storm had begun in the afternoon and worsened quickly. Snow whipped against the cabin walls, and the wind shook the door. The cowboy added another log to the fire and stirred it carefully. The warmth filled the room, but even inside he could feel the cold trying to creep in through the cracks in the walls. He sighed, knowing that nights like this could be dangerous if one was caught outside. Suddenly, a sound reached his ears, a soft, hesitant tapping at the door. He froze. The storm made it hard to hear anything clearly, but the tapping repeated, soft and insistent. The cowboy's hand went instinctively to the rifle leaning in the corner, though he did not move it to aim. He squinted toward the door, peering into the swirling snow. For a moment he wondered if the wind was playing tricks on him, but then he heard a voice, quiet and trembling. "My fire went out, may I stay tonight?" The words were soft, almost blending with the wind. The cowboy's heart skipped a beat. He did not expect company, especially not in a storm like this. He hesitated. The plains were dangerous, and strangers could not always be trusted. He knew the stories of settlers and native tribes clashing over land, over misunderstanding, over fear. But he also knew the snow could kill a person in hours. Someone out there, asking for help in this weather, might not last long without shelter. He opened the door a little wider, peering out into the white blur. Standing in the snow was a young Apache woman. Her dark hair was damp with melting snow, and her clothes were thin, not enough to keep her safe from the freezing wind. She looked tired, shivering, and her eyes held both fear and hope. Even in the storm, the cowboy could see the strength in her posture. She did not beg, she asked politely with a quiet dignity that made him pause. The cowboy stepped back and gestured for her to come inside. "Come in," he said, his voice low but kind. "Hurry before the storm gets worse." She nodded and stepped carefully over the threshold. Snow melted from her clothes onto the wooden floor, and the warm air of the cabin immediately began to thaw her frozen fingers. She rubbed her hands together, grateful for the fire. The cowboy closed the door, securing it against the wind, and added another log to the hearth. The flames danced higher, filling the room with light and warmth. For a few moments neither spoke. The only sounds were the crackling fire and the occasional gust of wind rattling the walls. The cowboy studied her quietly. She looked young, perhaps in her early 20s. Her skin was a warm brown, her eyes dark and alert. She seemed tired but not broken. There was a quiet resilience about her, a sense that she had survived hardships before and would continue to do so. Finally, she spoke again, her voice soft but steady. "Thank you, I did not think I would find anyone out here." The cowboy nodded. "It's not safe to be outside in this weather," he said simply. "You're lucky you found this cabin." She offered a small, grateful smile. I was separated from my people. The storm came suddenly and I lost my way. I thought I could make it to shelter, but I could not." Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. The cowboy moved around the room, fetching a thick blanket from a chest. He handed it to her and she wrapped it around her shoulders. The warmth seeped into her cold body and she let out a small sigh of relief. "Sit by the fire," the cowboy said. "It will help you warm up." She did as he asked, sitting on a small wooden stool near the hearth. The glow of the fire reflected in her eyes, and she seemed almost to relax for the first time in hours. The cowboy watched her, noting the way she moved with quiet grace, the way her gaze lingered on the flames. There was a story behind those eyes, he realized, one he wanted to hear but did not know how to ask yet. He returned to his side of the cabin and sat down on a rough wooden chair. Silence settled between them again, but it was no longer tense. It was the kind of silence that happens when two people understand each other without words. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside there was a fragile sense of safety. After a while, he spoke. "My name is Jack," he said. "I live out here alone, don't often see visitors." She looked up at him. "I am Gita," she said. Her voice was quiet, but there was a strength in it. "Thank you for letting me in, Jack." They sat together, watching the fire. Jack noticed the way Gita's hands moved, rubbing her arms to keep warm. He realized that she must have been traveling for hours, perhaps even days, through the snow and cold. The thought of someone enduring that alone made him respect her even more. "I have some food," he said after a moment, moving to a small cupboard. "Not much, but it will keep you from going hungry tonight." He handed her a piece of dried meat and some bread. She accepted it with a nod of thanks, and they ate in companionable silence. The warmth of the fire, the small meal, and the quiet company began to chase away the chill from their bodies and hearts. As the night deepened, Jack realized that he had not felt this kind of connection with anyone in a long time. He did not know her story, her past, or her struggles, but there was something about her presence that felt important. For Ida, the cabin was more than shelter. It was safety, a place where she could rest without fear, even if just for a few hours. Outside, the wind continued to scream, rattling the walls and howling across the plains. Inside, the fire burned steadily, a small defiance against the cold. Jack and Ida sat close enough to feel the warmth from the flames, yet far enough to respect each other's space. Neither spoke much after the meal. Words seemed unnecessary. The act of sharing warmth, food, and shelter spoke louder than any conversation could. Hours passed. The storm slowly began to ease, though snow still drifted against the cabin. The fire crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Jack occasionally glanced at Ida, who seemed lost in thought, staring into the flames. He wondered what she was thinking, what fears or hopes she carried with her. She noticed his glances too, and gave him a small, understanding nod. In that moment, a quiet understanding formed between them. Two people from different worlds, different lives, had found each other in the vast emptiness of the plains. The snowstorm had brought them together, and for one night the harshness of the world seemed a little less cruel. Jack stood and moved to the window, looking out at the endless white. The storm had left its mark, covering the plains in thick layers of snow. He thought of the trails and the dangers hidden beneath the snow, and he was grateful that Ida had arrived safely. She would have struggled to survive out there alone, but now she was safe, for the moment at least. When he turned back to her, she was still watching the fire. He saw a flicker of something in her eyes, relief, gratitude, maybe even a sense of hope. He nodded to her, a silent acknowledgement of their shared night. Words were not needed. As the night stretched on, both felt the quiet weight of exhaustion. They were strangers, yet the storm had made them companions. In the warmth of the cabin, in the presence of the fire, they found a brief moment of peace amidst the chaos of the winter plains. The storm outside continued to rumble, though the worst of it had passed. Snow still fell softly, covering the plains in a quiet, white blanket, but inside the cabin, warmth and light offered a stark contrast to the cold and silence outside. Ida sat near the fire, wrapped in the thick blanket Jack had given her. She could feel the warmth seeping slowly into her body, melting the chill that had clung to her bones for hours. She watched the flames dance, hypnotized by the way the light moved and twisted, casting long, wavering shadows across the walls. Jack, meanwhile, had moved to a small table near the window. He poured himself some water from a metal cup and sat down, glancing at Ida occasionally. There was something about her presence that felt different. He had lived alone for months, maybe years, depending on how you counted. Loneliness had been his only companion, and he had grown used to it. Yet now, with Ida here, the silence felt less like emptiness and more like a space waiting to be filled with conversation, stories, and shared experience. "I can't imagine how cold it must be outside," Jack said quietly, breaking the silence. "It's easy to underestimate the storm when you're caught in it. One wrong step, one miscalculation, and it could be over in hours." Ida nodded, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "I've survived cold before," she said softly, "but not like this, not alone. I thought I would never find shelter." Her voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer exhaustion of the journey. Jack offered her a small, reassuring smile. "You're safe now," he said, "at least until the snow stops." For a few moments, they both fell silent again, letting the sound of the fire fill the room. Outside, the wind whispered against the cabin, rattling the wooden walls and shaking the roof slightly. Inside, the warmth from the fire wrapped around them like a protective blanket. It was a strange kind of peace, one born from the storm, from isolation, and from the unlikely companionship of two strangers thrown together by circumstance. After a while, Ida shifted slightly and looked at Jack. "You live alone here?" she asked. Jack nodded. "Yes. For some time now. The ranch is far, and I was asked to watch this section of land. It's quiet, too quiet sometimes." He paused, scratching the back of his neck. "But it has its benefits. You learn to survive, to depend on yourself. You learn to notice things others might overlook." Ita listened closely. There was an understanding in his words that resonated with her. Though their lives were different, she could relate to the solitude, to the constant vigilance required to survive in the wild. "I know what you mean," she said. "I travel with my people, but sometimes circumstances make us separate. You must learn to survive alone, even if it is not by choice." Jack nodded, impressed by her calm, reflective manner. "That's true," he said. "And sometimes the solitude teaches you things you wouldn't learn any other way." There was a pause, a quiet moment where neither spoke. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. Outside, snow drifted slowly to the ground, covering the plains in white silence. Inside, the cabin felt like a small haven, a bubble of warmth and safety against the harshness of the winter world. Ida reached into the folds of her blanket and pulled out a small bundle of belongings. A few items, wrapped carefully in cloth, rested in her hands. She looked down at them, then back up at Jack. "I did not bring much," she said softly. "Only what I could carry. The storm came so quickly, and I had to leave some things behind." Jack gestured toward the corner of the cabin. "You can leave them over there," he said. "I'll make sure they stay dry." She nodded and carefully set the bundle down, grateful for the small bit of space he offered. Then, she returned to her seat by the fire. The warmth had begun to restore her energy, and she could feel the tension leaving her body slowly. "Do you want some more tea?" Jack asked, standing and moving to the small kettle on the stove. He poured hot water into a cup, letting the steam rise gently. "It will help you warm up from the inside." Ita nodded, accepting the cup with both hands. She blew gently on the surface, then took a small sip. The warmth spread through her chest, and she let out a quiet sigh of relief. "Thank you," she said. "It's comforting." Jack smiled. "Comfort is important," he said simply, "especially on nights like this." They sat together, sipping tea and listening to the storm gradually quieting outside. The fire crackled, the kettle hissed softly, and the cabin seemed to hold them in a protective embrace. For the first time in many days, Ida felt truly safe. The fear and cold that had accompanied her journey were beginning to fade, replaced by a sense of calm she hadn't felt in a long time. After a few minutes, Jack spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "You must have had a difficult journey to get here. The plains are not forgiving, and the winter, it can be deadly." Ida nodded, looking into the fire. "Yes," she said softly. "I was separated from my people while traveling. The storm came suddenly. I thought I could find shelter, but the snow came too quickly. I did not know if I would make it." Jack listened intently, nodding in understanding. He could see the truth in her eyes, the quiet courage that had carried her this far. "You are strong," he said. "It takes a lot of courage to face a storm like this alone." Ida offered a small, grateful smile. "Strength is necessary," she said. "Sometimes we have no choice but to be strong, but even strength has its limits. That is why finding shelter is so important." Jack nodded. "I know that feeling," he said. "There have been nights when I wondered if I would make it through. This land, it doesn't forgive mistakes easily." The conversation continued, soft and reflective. They spoke of survival, of life on the plains, of the small victories and losses that came with living in such a harsh world. Jack shared stories of his cattle, the dangers of the wild animals, and the long days spent riding across the open land. Ida spoke of her people, the lessons she had learned growing up, and the ways she had learned to navigate the challenges of the wilderness. As the night wore on, a quiet trust began to grow between them. Though they came from very different worlds, they recognized in each other a shared understanding of hardship and resilience. There was no need for grand gestures or declarations. Their mutual respect and shared experience of surviving in the cold wilderness spoke louder than words. Jack glanced at the single bed in the corner of the cabin. He hesitated, unsure if he should offer it. It was small, just enough for one person, and he wasn't used to sharing his space. But he also recognized that Ida had endured much to reach here, and he wanted to offer her comfort if she needed it. "Would you like to rest?" he asked quietly. "I have a bed, though it is small. You can use it if you need to." Ida shook her head gently. "No," she said. "I can manage on the floor. I do not want to impose." Jack studied her for a moment, impressed by her independence and pride. "Very well," he said. "The floor by the fire is warm. You'll be safe there, at least for the night." They prepared the small space by the fire for Ida to rest. Jack fetched another blanket from the chest and laid it carefully on the floor, creating a comfortable area for her to lie down. She thanked him quietly, settling onto the blankets and wrapping herself snugly. The warmth from the fire made the space cozy, and she closed her eyes, feeling the tension of the journey begin to melt away. Jack watched her for a moment, then returned to his chair. He kept the fire burning, adding logs carefully, and settled in to keep an eye on the cabin through the long night. Though they were strangers, there was a sense of shared responsibility and companionship. The storm outside had forced them together, but the trust and understanding forming between them were their own. Hours passed, and the storm outside began to subside completely. The wind slowed, the snow drifted softly to the ground, and the world outside became quiet once more. Inside, the fire crackled and popped, casting long, flickering shadows across the walls. Ida slept peacefully, her breathing steady, while Jack remained awake, listening to the faint sounds of the night. In the quiet moments, he thought about the strange turn of events that had brought her to his cabin. He realized how easily life could change in the wilderness, how quickly danger could appear, and how important it was to show kindness when the opportunity arose. Ida's arrival had reminded him that even in isolation, connections could form in the most unexpected ways. When the first light of dawn began to filter through the snow-covered windows, Jack quietly watched Ida stir. She opened her eyes, blinking against the soft morning light, and looked around the cabin. The storm had passed, leaving the plains blanketed in fresh snow, sparkling in the early sun. Jack smiled at her. "Good morning," he said softly. "The storm is over." Ida returned the smile, a hint of warmth in her expression. "Good morning," she said. "Thank you for everything last night." Jack nodded. "You're welcome," he said. "I'm glad you're safe." For a few moments, they simply looked at each other, the shared night creating an unspoken bond. Though they would soon return to their separate lives, the memory of this night of warmth, safety, and understanding would remain with them both. The first rays of sunlight stretched across the snow-covered plains, turning the white landscape into a soft, glowing expanse. The storm had passed, leaving the world quiet and still. Inside the cabin, the warmth from the fire lingered, filling the small space with a gentle glow. Ida had slept through most of the night, her body slowly regaining strength after the long journey and the harsh cold. Jack moved quietly around the cabin, careful not to disturb her rest. He poured himself a cup of hot water and held it, watching her as she stirred. Her dark eyes opened slowly, taking in the cabin, the fire, and him. There was a moment of silence, filled with the soft crackling of the fire and the occasional creak of the wooden cabin. Then she sat up, brushing the blankets from her shoulders. "Good morning," Jack said, offering a small smile. "Sleep well." Ida nodded, a faint smile on her lips. "Yes, better than I have in many days, thank you." "You're welcome," Jack replied. "The storm has passed. You'll be able to continue your journey soon if you like." Ida looked out the window at the endless white plains. Her eyes reflected a mixture of relief and concern. "I will need to find my people," she said softly. "I do not know how far I am from them. I only know that they must be somewhere nearby." Jack nodded. "We can figure it out," he said. "It's safer if we wait until the sun is fully up. The snow can hide dangerous patches or weak ground. Even with experience, it is easy to get hurt." She looked at him thoughtfully. "You are wise," she said. "The land teaches those who listen." Jack shrugged modestly. "Experience teaches more than books," he said with a small smile. "And you have survived this storm. That is no small feat." Ida's lips curved into a faint smile, but her gaze remained serious. "Surviving is sometimes a matter of necessity, not choice," she said. "I have learned to endure, but endurance is not the same as peace. I have never been so cold, so alone, and yet I have never been so grateful for a stranger's kindness." Jack looked at her carefully. There was something in her words that made him pause. In all his years alone, he had rarely thought about gratitude or kindness in such a simple, pure form. Life on the plains was often harsh and selfish. Survival was the first rule, and trust came only after long observation. Yet here was a woman, a stranger who had endured the storm and whose first thoughts were of respect and appreciation. "Sit down and have some breakfast," he said finally. "It will give you more energy for the journey ahead." He moved to the small cupboard and pulled out some dried meat, bread, and a few small fruits he had kept for emergencies. He arranged a simple meal on a wooden plate and set it near Aida. She accepted it with a nod of thanks, and they ate together, the quiet companionship offering a comfort neither had expected. As they ate, Jack began to speak, telling stories of the land, the animals, and the dangers he had faced. He spoke of long days on horseback, of wolves stalking the edges of the plains, of nights when he had felt the cold seep into his bones despite the fire. Aida listened intently, her eyes reflecting the firelight, and occasionally added her own stories. She spoke of traveling with her people, of learning to read the signs of the land, the way snow and wind could reveal hidden paths, or how animal tracks could tell stories if one paid attention. Their conversation grew more personal as the morning progressed. Jack told her about the loneliness he had faced living on the plains, about nights spent staring into the fire and wondering if anyone else in the world felt the same way. Ida spoke of her family, her people, and the lessons she had learned in her youth about courage, patience, and survival. There was no need for pretense or false words. Each spoke with honesty, and the other listened with respect. After a while, Jack moved to the window and looked out. The plains were silent, blanketed in snow, and the sun reflected off the frozen landscape, creating a dazzling, almost magical scene. "It is beautiful," he said softly, "but dangerous if one is not careful." Ida nodded, following his gaze. "The land is always both," she said. "It gives life and takes it away in the same breath. That is why we must respect it and each other." Jack turned to look at her, impressed by her wisdom and calm presence. "You are wise beyond your years," he said. "I wish I had learned to see the world this way when I was younger." She smiled faintly, but her eyes held a seriousness that reminded him of the storm they had survived. "Experience teaches whether we are ready or not," she said. "And the people who survive learn to respect what they cannot control." The morning passed slowly, each moment stretching in quiet companionship. Outside, the snow glistened in the sun, reflecting light into the cabin and making the room feel brighter and warmer. Inside, the fire burned steadily, filling the space with a comforting warmth. Jack and Aida continued to talk, moving from survival stories to dreams to hopes for the future. They spoke of the world beyond the plains, of places they might visit one day, of the lives they hoped to live. At one point, Jack offered to show Aida some of the land around the cabin. He explained that even in winter, the plains held lessons, signs, and hidden dangers. She accepted, curious and eager to learn more. They bundled themselves in warm layers and stepped outside, the cold biting at their faces but the sun providing some relief. Jack pointed out tracks in the snow, some fresh, some old. He explained how to tell the difference between rabbit, fox, and deer, and how the direction of the tracks could reveal much about the animal's behavior. Ida watched carefully, absorbing every detail, occasionally asking questions and demonstrating her own knowledge of tracking and reading the land. As they walked, they shared small stories and laughter, the kind that comes naturally when trust begins to form. The snow crunched under their feet, and the wind carried away their words into the open plains. Despite the cold, there was a warmth between them, a connection born from shared experience, mutual respect, and the understanding that the world was vast and often unforgiving, yet moments like this offered hope. When they returned to the cabin, they found themselves tired but content. Ida prepared a small corner by the fire to rest again, while Jack checked the cabin and added more wood to the fire. They worked together silently, the simple acts of cooperation deepening their sense of trust. As evening approached, the sun dipping lower into the sky, Jack and Aida sat by the fire once more. The light outside grew soft and golden, reflecting off the snow and filling the cabin with a gentle glow. They spoke less now, content to simply sit and watch the flames dance. There was a quiet peace in the room, a sense of shared understanding that did not require words. Jack finally spoke, breaking the silence. "It is strange," he said thoughtfully, how the storm brought you here to this small cabin in this quiet place. Life has a way of moving people together when they need each other most. Ida nodded, looking into the fire. Yes, she said softly, sometimes the world forces paths to cross and we must be ready to accept help when it comes. And sometimes we learn more from strangers than from those we know well. Jack studied her for a moment, reflecting on her words. She was right, of course. In all his years on the plains, he had encountered people, yes, but rarely had he met someone who spoke with such clarity and honesty about life, survival, and respect. The storm had created an unlikely friendship, and both knew it was special. Night fell and the cold outside returned, but inside the cabin the warmth persisted. Jack offered Ida the bed again, but she politely declined, insisting she was fine on the floor by the fire. They settled into a comfortable routine, fire tending, sharing quiet conversation, and occasionally stepping outside to admire the snow-covered world. By late evening, fatigue began to weigh heavily on them both. Jack sat back in his chair, keeping an eye on the fire, while Ida lay on the blankets, her breathing steady. Outside, the snow reflected the moonlight, creating a magical, serene landscape. The night was calm, a stark contrast to the storm that had brought them together. In the quiet hours, both reflected on the day. Jack thought about the unexpected bond forming between them, how a storm had turned strangers into companions, if only for a short while. Ida thought about the kindness she had received, the safety she now felt, and the new understanding of a world she had only known from a distance. Though words were few, the connection between them deepened. There was trust, respect, and an unspoken promise to watch over each other, even briefly. The storm had ended, but its impact lingered, leaving warmth, understanding, and the realization that even in the harshest conditions, human kindness could prevail. The morning arrived quietly, as if the land itself did not want to disturb the peace that had settled over the cabin. Soft sunlight filtered through the small window, touching the wooden walls and warming the air just enough to signal a new day. Outside, the snow lay untouched, smooth and shining, reflecting the pale blue of the sky. The storm felt like a distant memory now, though its effects still surrounded the small cabin in every direction. Jack woke early, as he always did. Years of living on the plains had trained his body to rise with the light. He stirred the fire carefully, making sure it would stay warm without growing too strong. As the flames came alive again, he glanced toward Ida. She was still asleep, resting on the blankets near the hearth. Her face looked calm now, no longer strained by fear or exhaustion. Seeing her like this filled Jack with a quiet sense of relief. He moved slowly, preparing a simple breakfast. The sound of water heating and wood shifting in the fire was gentle, almost soothing. Ida eventually opened her eyes and sat up, stretching slightly. She looked around the cabin, then at Jack, and smiled. "Good morning," she said softly. "Good morning," Jack replied. "The weather looks good today." Ida stood and walked to the window. She looked out across the wide plains, her eyes scanning the land carefully. "Yes," she said. "The snow is settled, the sky is clear, it is a good day to travel." Jack nodded, though a quiet weight settled in his chest. He had known this moment would come. Ida would leave soon. The storm had passed, and she had her path to follow. Still, knowing and feeling were two different things. They ate breakfast together, speaking little. There was no awkwardness, only a shared understanding that something important was coming to an end. After they finished, Ida gathered her few belongings and wrapped them carefully. "I should go soon," she said. "My people may be searching for me. I do not want them to worry." "I understand," Jack replied. "I can walk with you for a while, help you find the safest direction." She nodded. "I would appreciate that." They dressed warmly and stepped outside together. The cold air was sharp but clean, filling their lungs with each breath. The snow crunched under their boots as they walked away from the cabin. Jack pointed out landmarks in the distance, low hills, clusters of trees, a frozen stream that could guide her path. "If you follow that direction," he said, "you should reach higher ground by midday. From there you might see signs of movement or smoke." Ida listened carefully, memorizing every detail. She trusted his knowledge of the land just as he trusted her strength and awareness. They walked in silence for a while, the vast plains stretching around them. The quiet felt different now, not lonely but full. Each step carried the weight of shared memories from the past 2 days. Finally, Ida stopped. She turned to face Jack. "This is far enough," she said gently. "I can find my way from here." Jack nodded, though he wished the walk could continue just a little longer. I believe you can. They stood facing each other, unsure how to say goodbye. Words felt small compared to what they had shared: shelter, warmth, trust, and understanding during a dangerous moment. Aida spoke first. You showed kindness when you did not have to, she said. I will remember that. Jack met her gaze. And you reminded me that the world is bigger than this cabin, bigger than my solitude. I will remember that too. She reached into her bundle and pulled out a small handmade token, simple but meaningful. Take this, she said. It is not much, but it carries gratitude. Jack accepted it carefully, touched by the gesture. Thank you, he said. I'll keep it. They shared one last look, a quiet exchange that held respect, warmth, and something deeper that did not need a name. Then Ida turned and began walking away, her figure growing smaller against the wide white land. Jack stood there for a long moment, watching until she disappeared into the distance. The plains felt different now, still vast, still silent, but no longer empty. He took a deep breath and turned back toward the cabin. When he returned, the cabin felt quieter than before, yet not lonely. He went about his daily tasks, checking supplies, tending the fire, preparing for the day. But his thoughts often drifted to the woman who had shared his shelter, his fire, and his time. As days passed, life slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Jack rode out to check the land, repaired fences, and prepared for the changing season, yet something within him had shifted. He found himself more aware of the world around him, the way the light changed throughout the day, the subtle signs of life beneath the snow, the importance of small acts of kindness. Sometimes, as he sat by the fire at night, he thought of Aida. He wondered if she had found her people, if she was safe, if she remembered the cabin and the cowboy who had opened his door during a storm. Far away, Aida did remember. She found her people later that day. There were tears, relief, and quiet gratitude shared among them. When she spoke of the storm, she spoke not only of the cold and fear, but of the kindness she had found in an unexpected place. She carried the memory of the cabin with her, the warmth of the fire, the calm voice of a man who asked nothing in return, and the understanding that even in a divided world, compassion could bridge great distances. Seasons changed. Snow melted into water, water fed the land, and green slowly returned to the plains. Jack's cabin stood firm, weathered but strong, just like the man who lived there. He still lived alone, but loneliness no longer weighed as heavily on his heart. He had learned something important, that one night, one act of kindness, one shared fire could change how a person saw the world. Sometimes, when the wind blew just right, Jack would step outside and look across the plains. He would remember the words spoken on a cold night. My fire went out, may I stay tonight? And he would smile, knowing that for one brief moment, two paths had crossed, and both lives had been quietly, meaningfully changed.